Welcome to the guide, Exile. It's time for another build guide. This time it's a classic Poison Vortex Occultist, a build I did cover a long time ago on the channel, but one that has certainly had a fair number of updates since then, and I have not seen too many updated guides on this build since then. After League starting with this build so many times over the last year, as it has largely been only buffed over the leagues, I figured I might as well make a guide for it, as I ended up pushing its viability much higher this league. The Occultist is one of my favorite classes, if for only one reason, those lovely chaos pops. I am not only addicted to the sound, but the screen-wide clear and the blatant disregard for enemy life. Profane Bloom allows for a very comfortable and fast mapping playstyle, of which I love starting my leagues with, and with the scaling of the pops being based on enemy life totals, this just means we have to have enough damage to start the pop chains by killing a single enemy or two in the pack. Now, the only requirement to make chaos pops occur is to kill a cursed enemy, so we could choose to use any skill to deliver the first kills. So why Blade Vortex? Well, I love this skill, and it also lets us charge headlong into packs and watch them explode. Since we're using Blade Vortex, it acts as a very strong poison delivery system, along with making use of uniques such as Ming's Heart to gain massive amounts of chaos damage from our physical base. And as we're using poison, we are also able to use Plague Bearer, which pairs very nicely with Blade Vortex as we're already running in close to enemy range to let us deal even more damage. The main area where this build falls off is generally in that it has low single target damage. And this is why I generally relegate the build to just league start mapping, as it has issues scaling into the endgame bosses, and usually after map farming I'm on to my next build anyway. But with this league I was able to make use of some of the new charms from Affliction to really beef up our single target and justify the investment into making this character a great all-arounder. For the most part, I've been using this build to farm corrupted T16 maps with Eldritch Altars, Beyond, Ambush, and it's really been handling them quite well, even with fully juiced up Wisp empowerments from Affliction. There are of course many deaths as I blindly alch, corrupt, run sextants, blindly run into packs, click Eldritch Altars with the best rewards while ignoring all the downsides, while also making sure to get as many Wisps from the Wildwood as possible. Although, even while doing this, I've easily made it to level 95, and only bricked one map completely, and pretty much taken out every non-Uber boss with ease. But of course, if you play this build a little bit smarter than I do, you could get to level 96, 97, or even up to 100. So let's get into how I put this build together this league, and all of the mechanics that make it work. So as we covered previously, we're going to be playing an Occultist. The nodes we'll take from the Occultist will include Profane Bloom, which cursed enemies will explode for a quarter of their life as chaos damage. Then we take Void Beacon, which reduces enemy chaos resistance, as well as reducing their life regeneration, which is great for some of those rares or enemies that have a lot of life regeneration. Then we take Withering Presence. This gives us a lot of chaos resistance, chaos damage, and also applies Withered to enemies, which is great all around in every one of those stats. And then finally we take Unholy Authority, which allows us to apply an additional curse, and then we no longer have to worry about hexproof enemies or hexproof map mod. Alright, so for the passive tree, we're going to be doing a bit of pathing, mainly looking for life, chaos damage, hexes, and poison damage, as well as some spell suppression. So the only keystone we get in this build is Eldritch Battery. This allows us to put our energy shield over our mana, allowing us to spend that instead of our mana, so we can reserve all of our mana and then have a lot of ES open for casting spells. Since we're not taking damage to energy shield, it'll always be recharging, which means we're going to have very good recovery on our resource for spending on skills. We also take up a fair amount of masteries. We pick up 2 life masteries, the 15% increased life mastery if there's no life modifiers on your equipped body armor, as well as the plus 50 to base life. For the Poison Mastery, we pick up enemies poisoned by you cannot deal critical strikes. This is a pretty good defensive option, especially when we're running map mods with multiple crit modifiers, damage modifiers. This helps cull a little bit of that. Then we also pick up Poisons you inflict deal damage 20% faster. This one's kind of a toss-up. I chose it because the dealing damage faster does not give us more total DPS, but it does increase the rate at which we get to our maximum DPS. So it allows us to ramp a bit faster into that. And since we have so much poison duration in the build, I found it really nice to kind of get where we need to be quicker. For damage over time mastery, we pick up the skill effect duration as well as duration of ailment on enemies. Both are great. Skill effect duration for Blade Vortex, and then duration of ailments is for poison. Reservation mastery, we just pick up the 8% increased damage for every aura or herald skill affecting you. For the evasion mastery, we're picking up the spell suppression. We just have to ensure that our helmet, body armor, gloves, boots have evasion rating on them, which isn't a problem as we are scaling evasion rating anyways. And then finally for duration mastery, we're picking 10% more skill effect duration, which allows us to keep our blade vortex up longer. As for jewels, we're running a rare jewel here that gives us 8% increased damage. We get some chaos damage over time multiplier and life. Generally, you want to look for chaos damage, increased damage. Anything that would be a global damage increase for your chaos pops is great. And as well, you want to look for a damage over time multiplier, chaos damage over time multiplier, and then, of course, life if you can get that. And then as a final modifier, if you can't get all damage modifiers, you can always look for an attack speed modifier while you're holding a shield, or attack and cast speed modifier, because those are great just for your mobility, your casting speed, just to keep you out of harm's way, so to speak. For our other two jewels, we'll be running uniques. I chose to use a That Which Was Taken. This is a new jewel from Affliction, which gives you kind of little sub-ascendancy classes. And for the ones that we care about, I wanted the increased poison duration for every poison you've inflicted recently, as well as the consecrated ground you create applies 9% increased damage to enemies. The other two aren't important for what we have. These pair nicely with our build, and the consecrated ground will make sense once I talk about the Affliction Ascendency we have. And then finally we have a Watcher's Eye. There are quite a few options you can choose on this one. I ended up finding this one for a pretty good price. I think it was like 6 or 7 divines. The real price is in the damage over time multiplier for Malevolence, which is a very good damage multiplier for us. But I'm also using Vitality, and this gives us increased life rate recovery, which is a global 10% more life recovery for our life regen, flasks, and everything like that. So we compare these together pretty well. I also tried using a flat life gained when you hit enemies with Vitality, but I found on single target it just really still wasn't enough. It was only about 250 life per second, which is pretty low, especially in most endgame scenarios. Though it was nice when you were mapping. You had 2 or 3 big targets that weren't dying. But otherwise, for the most part, while you're mapping, we're going to be making use of Blood Drinker, which gives us 2% of life on kill. So pretty much every pack we kill, we just shoot back up to full life, no problem. Really isn't too much of an issue with the mapping staying alive, aside from getting one shot. So for the Watcher's Eye, you could go with the damage over time from Malevolence. You could go with the Vitality life gain on hit. You could go with ailments deal damage faster with Malevolence to help your ramp speed if you want that. You could go with any of the grace modifiers if you want more evasion, more suppression, movement speed. There's a whole bunch of options. I just found this one and it worked out pretty well. Otherwise, you can straight up just get a damage jewel here as well. There's no reason as to why you'd have to use this jewel. It's just what I found. So this is a bit more league specific, but we do also have a Ascendancy from the Affliction League. I chose to go with the Primalist, which allows us to slot in charms. Charms are effectively lines pulled from Ascendancies with reduced effect, but you can stack multiple of them, which makes it really nice because you can take the same line and keep stacking it more and more. So as we saw in the That Which Was Taken jewel, we're going to stack a few increased poison durations, for which we end up getting 300% total extra poison duration, which allows us to really ramp and stack our poisons up. Within about 9 seconds we have maximum poisons, and this really allows this build to reach a very high damage per second. So for our first charm here, we have a blind on hit, which is great since we're evasion. This allows us to gain a little bit more evasion chance from enemies, and it also has the poison duration. The second one, we have a frenzy charge on hit along with evasion rating per frenzy charge. This one's pretty nice because we're hitting so frequently, we pretty much always have frenzy charges, which are great for more damage and speed, which we like while we're mapping. The evasion rating is a pretty good option for the suffix on this. Not too many great suffixes that we can make use of on this one. And then finally, we have a poison duration, again, with a consecrated ground creation on a rare or unique enemy. So this pairs with the That Which Was Taken jewel, which not only gives us life regeneration, but now makes the enemy take more damage. So those two together work pretty well. All right, as for Pantheons, I am using Soul of the Brine King. This is nice to keep us from getting stun locked, as we don't really have stun avoidance or stun immunity. This also gives us our freeze avoidance as well as reduced effective chill, which is nice since our gearing is pretty tough to fit any of these things in. The Pantheon gives us that nice kind of freebie. As for the miner, I am currently using the life flasks gain charges, as since our recovery is largely based on killing enemies or having a moderate amount of life regeneration, using a life pod is pretty big, as we can't use any sort of leech with a damage over time build. Of course, depending on what content you're doing, you might want to use a different miner. The other miner that I was using was Aberrath, because I was running Exarch altars. This one is pretty much a no-brainer for that, since there's so much burning ground there that it is really deadly. Otherwise, it's really your choice when you're doing whatever content it is you choose to do. All right, so now we can start with the gem links. We will be, of course, using a Blade Vortex. We also have the option of using Vol Blade Vortex, which is great for bosses or strong single-target enemies. It allows us to stack more poisons more quickly. Linked to that, we're going to have an Awakened Void manipulation. It can be the regular version as well. The Awakened versions in this are not required, they're just more damage. Efficacy, this is good for the damage over time, as well as skill effect duration for our Blade Vortex. Awaken Deadly Ailments, Unbound Ailments, and then Unleash. Unleash is really nice because it allows us to keep our stacks at maximum. Although we do have quite a bit of duration, you might be able to swap this out for something else, such as an Empower. It really just depends on how much you want to be managing your Blade Vortex stacks. I found it more comfortable to be using Unleash just to keep our stacks up and not having to stand still casting as much. Though when you are on a stronger single target and you're stacking poisons, you'll be casting anyway, so it's a real toss-up. In fact, taking a look at the POB, if we were to swap into another damage support here, we would actually be hitting the poison dot cap of 35 million, especially if we're sitting on a target for 9 seconds or whatever. So it would really only help your ramp time versus your actual total output. And then because we are an occultist, we will be running some curses. I chose to run all my curses on blasphemy. So we will have a despair, which is a given, as this gives us better damage for our chaos. Then we have tempt chains, again, great for poison damage, as well as a bit of defensiveness. And then we have punishment. This one's great for damage, because once enemies are below half HP, they're going to be taking 50% increased damage, which is a nice multiplier. Although with blasphemy and curse reduction on enemies, it'll be a bit less, though we do have some curse effectiveness in our tree, so balances out a little bit, as well as debilitating them, which makes them deal less damage. So a little bit of both offensive and defensive. Our other ores are going to include Vitality. Due to how many ores I have reserved and the amount of mana that I have, we run a low-level Vitality. This is really just to get the Watcher's Eye mod that I have. As we're evasion scaling, Grace adds a lot of evasion. And then we just have a Flame Dash in here for some extra movement. As for temporal auras, we have a Vol Haste that we use. I don't make use of the actual haste, though it is possible as it is on a Divine Blessing, so we could press that as well. Though instead of that, I much rather use the Malevolence, as you can only have one of those skills up at a time. And this lets us benefit from the Watcher's Eye, as well as give us a bunch of damage. Linked to both of these is Inspiration for reducing the mana cost, as Divine Blessing ups the mana cost by a lot on these skills. As we are using Eldritch Battery with a bunch of Energy Shield, is generally not an issue, as it recovers pretty quickly after we use it anyways. And our Malevolence right now costs about 500, and we have over 700, so in most cases you can cast this whenever you want. And again, the Vol Haste, it can be run without the need of the linking to either of these gems. It's just the sockets which I had it placed in. For our movement skill, we're using a Shield Charge with faster attacks. As I mentioned before, getting increased attack speed is great, as well as movement speed, because that'll scale our Shield Charge movement speed. In this link set, we also have a cast when damage taken with Immortal Call. Again, this works out pretty well because we have so much skill effect duration. The Immortal Call lasts a fair amount of time. I know I should have quality on this so it recovers quicker, but I just haven't done it. And finally, in the weapon, we're going to have a Withering Step. This gives us the elusive buff, as well as some movement speed, and also applies withered debuffs to enemies as we are approaching them. So what we basically do is put this on left click, and you'll pretty much always be triggering it, running around bosses, running around enemies, and you're going to juice up their withered stacks really fast, along with our Ascendancy applying them every second. So you'll get to your 15 stacks much quicker, and it won't take the full 15 seconds basically from the Ascendancy. The buff is also really nice for just the elusive effect as well. And then finally we have Plague Bearer, as mentioned before. This will absorb some of the poison damage you're doing up to a total amount. I believe it's about 1.1 million with the level it is here. And then when you press the button to infect instead of incubate, you will be dealing that damage in an AoE over a set period of time, and it'll help deal quite a bit of damage to enemies in the area around you. Alright, as for gear, we're using a Cold Iron Point in the main hand. Great for damage because we're giving flat levels to Blade Vortex, and every level we can give to Blade Vortex gives us a lot more base damage to then get poisons from. I got this corrupted with increased damage over time. For the helmet, we're making use of regular rare. We're looking for high life roll and suppression and dexterity on it, as well as any resistances you can get. The mana reservation efficiency is great for the use of vitality, slipping that in just for the Watcher's Eye, as well as the Despair Curse effect. For the shield, we are just looking for suppression chance first, then life, then resistances, and if we can get a lot of evasion along with that, that's great. For the gloves, we're looking for life, resistances, and regen. You can also get the suffix of attack speed, but I ended up finding these gloves with some good regen on them and ended up getting the attack speed on the Eldritch Orb on the implicit. But you're of course losing out on increased damage per frenzy charge, which we do have, though I felt it was a fair trade-off for the little bit extra survivability. Then our other Eldritch implicit is some extra evasion from our helmet and boots. For the boots, we're basically just looking for life, movement speed, resistance, and suppression. If you can also get dexterity on there, that's great. Dexterity is going to be useful for Dendrobate. I'll talk about that in a second. Trying to fill out as many stats as we can on these rares is what we need to do. For the chest, we're using the Dendrobate. This chest is great for poison because not only are we going to get increased poison damage if we hit 300 dexterity, as mentioned before, we're trying to get that dexterity on items. We also get some poison duration, and we get a level 10 chance to poison as a 7th support, which gives us some more flat chaos damage as well as poison chance. And this is pretty nice because it allows us to free up 40% poison chance from the tree or other auras like a Herald of Agony and put it into more useful setups for our damage. I ended up finding a corrupted one with +2 level of socketed AoE gems. You could also get one with plus level of gems or +2 duration gems. Or you could just get one that's not corrupted at all. It really will work either way. Alright, now for the jewelry. For the amulet, the Replica Dragon Fang's Flight is a really good choice. It gives, again, more levels to Blade Vortex, as well as giving increased reservation efficiency of skills. Pairing this with the helmet really lets us reserve those multiple Blasphemy auras, as well as fitting in a little bit extra. I anointed Toxic Strikes on this to finish out our poison chance, as well as damage over time multiplier for our poison. For the rings, I am using 2 Ming's Hearts. These give an insane amount of physical damage as extra chaos, at the cost of course, reduced energy shield, reduced life. This means that while we are getting a lot of damage, we are at, 4k life, which honestly isn't too bad, and I've been mapping with it like this, though over the last couple rotations of maps, I swapped into Aventor's Gamble because I didn't really need the damage for mapping, and I just happened to find this on the ground, so I said, I'll just toss it on. These rings are really just for damage. You can totally get away without using one of them while you're mapping, not doing serious endgame content, and use literally any other ring in there. And then finally for the belt, we're using a Stygian Vise. On the belt, we're basically just looking for life, strength. If you need resistances, get those. And then, of course, regeneration of life is great. I picked up this one and I was able to craft on the mana with life regeneration, and then I unfortunately Exalt Slammed Flask mana recovery rate. For the jewel, I was basically looking for life and dexterity because I just needed a bit more dexterity to fill out the Dendrobate, and then anything good on top of that. I ended up finding one with some energy shield, which is not bad as a extra resource for spending. And then flat added physical damage while holding a shield to spells. Pretty good as we're flat physical based. And that pretty much covers the gear there. The big synergies being our Dendrobate, stacking up 300 dexterity, and then our +2 gem levels between our Cold Iron Point, our Dragonflang's Flight, and the Dendrobate gives us a lot of base levels to Blade Vortex. As you can see, it's level 28. And on top of that, the Ming's Hearts add a whole bunch of damage and really elevate this build up. As for flasks, I'm using a life flask that has corrupted blood immunity on it. You could also opt to get corrupted blood immunity on the rare jewel in the tree or on your abyss jewel, whatever you choose. Then we're using a quartz flask. You definitely want this not so much for the suppression, but the phasing. Since we're shield charging into enemies, being able to walk through them is really required, otherwise you get stuck and die. Then of course a Quicksilver, rolling this with Flask effect, the Alchemists versus any other mod is going to be your best bet. I just was too lazy. Then we have a Silver Flask just to give us Onslaught. Again, with Charms and some other options, you can also opt to get Onslaught on kill versus the Flask. I just chose to use the Flask because I was balancing out other things on those other items. And then finally a Jade Flask for extra evasion rating. Always good to roll this one with increased evasion rating on it just to buff it up even more. Alright, as for leveling this build, it's kind of a toss-up. I generally always level this thing on a league start, so I have no currency, no value on the account, so I'm just going straight out the rip with nothing. For the most part, I usually end up leveling this as an Armageddon brand with Cremation for assistance on single target, which works great all the way up till the end of the X, and you can even run it into maps a little bit. It's not that bad as long as you spec in the tree correctly. And then I'll swap over to Blade Vortex once I get basically into the map level where you're going to have a 5-link and you're going to be able to be delivering the pops and the damage correctly, as this build requires a bit of tree pathing, the poison chance, and our Ascendancy to really get it going. Usually around Merc Ascendancy is when you're going to have that damage. So coming from 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the league where you may have some currency and some really good leveling uniques, really good leveling items, you could go right out the start leveling it as Blade Vortex if you want, but of course your experience will be different than mine, but any of them are correct. What I'll do is leave the way I spec the tree leveling with Armageddon brand in the path of building, and then if you're looking to just level this as if you were going to level it as the build is, you can just follow the tree as the tree is in the final tree. And as for budget gear, I pretty much always start out with an Obliteration Wand. This is just great because you get more fizz damage as Chaos, and you can get it corrupted pretty easily with AoE or something of the like to give you a little bit more utility. And then of course this gives another percentage chance to explode, so you're getting more pops. Along with that, I choose to usually use an Impresence. This allows us to have the free Despair reservation along with some more damage on the amulet, allowing us to fit in a bit more auras on our build, depending on what you want, where you want it. And then of course, you can just get a completely normal 5-link, 6-link chest. Literally has to be nothing special. I pretty much ran this all the way through tier 16 maps, and I was still running it on tier 16 maps until I decided I want to go for big boss damage, and swapped into the Dendrobate setup I have now. Again, helmet's very similar. I usually like to run plus level of AoE gems and toss my Plague Bearer in there, toss my Withering Step in there, and just get a few more levels out of them to give me a little bit more damage. And then the other pieces of gear are just the same. You just look for life, resistances, suppression where you can get it so that you're capped out with your 100% suppression. So there it is, a current day Poison BV Occultist that delivers not only satisfying pops, but also some solid endgame damage. I wholeheartedly recommend playing this build if you're looking for some satisfying mapping, especially on league starts, as this type of build takes off really quickly due to Profane Bloom. And with this league, I'd also consider it a great all-around content farmer with the addition of Charms in the Affliction League. So as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, Exile.